Okay, guys, this is the third of four course videos for review here, and this is going to be the longest one, so grab you some Coke or Dr. Pepper or probably a real strong cup of coffee, because it's going to be boring, but I'll try to get you through this. It's about 60 some odd questions dealing with crisis intervention, which I think you actually start tomorrow with in the academy. I'm recording this on Tuesday. I talked to y'all guys earlier today. So again, hopefully you'll find all these videos at least, helpful for your next test. Again, I hate that I'm not going to be able to be there, but I got to take a vacation before everything's done. So we're going to start. This is several questions, a lot of questions on crisis intervention. So let's talk about insanity. And again, I'm going to give you the TCOL guide number there, so just to help you look it up if you have any questions. 29.9. It talks about the definition of insanity, and I think it's kind of the Merriam-Webster's dictionary meaning there. So be familiar with the definition of insanity. Which is, of course, the unsoundness of mind or lack of ability to understand that prevents one from having the mental capacity required by law to enter into a particular relationship, status, or transaction, or that releases one from criminal or civil responsibility. So that's Merriam-Webster's definition there. So be familiar with that. Be familiar with the definition of mental illness. This is 29.8 of the TCOL guide there. Again, the definition of mental illness. Then the next question is 29.18. It talks about antisocial personality disorder, or you may see sometimes it referred to as asocial personality disorder. Someone that has that disorder is going to exhibit some behaviors. You need to be able to tell me which one of these is not one of those behaviors. Is it a pattern? Is it a pattern of rule breaking and failure to conform with social norms? In other words, infringing on the rights of others, and or maybe also constantly or consistently engaging in illegal behavior? Or is it a lack of remorse? Or is it deceitfulness, as indicated, say, by repeated lying or the use of aliases or conning others for personal gain? Or is the one that's not one of those behaviors? That's what the question's asking. Which of these are not one of those behaviors? Is it a willingness to accept accountability or consequences for their actions? And if you've ever known anybody with antisocial or asocial personality disorder, you find the prisons and jails full of them, especially the prisons. They're never going to accept accountability or the consequences for their actions. It's everybody else's fault. So be familiar with that. Next question is also 29.18, talks about the paranoid personality disorder. Which of these is not going to be one of the behaviors exhibited by someone that has that paranoid personality disorder? Is it they tend to be rigid, critical, and cannot accept criticism? Is it they have a high need for control and autonomy? Is it that they are reluctant to confide in others for fear of betrayal? Or is it they tend to be relaxed but alert? So again, which one of those is not one of those? It's one of those except questions. All the below includes, includes all the following except which one. Then there's the borderline personality disorder, also is 29.18. Borderline personality disorder. That should give you a clue there. They're on borderline. There are 4 behaviors listed in here. You need to be able to know which one is not one of those behaviors. Reoccurrent suicidal behavior, poor anger control, pervasive pattern of instability, of interpersonal relationships, self-image, emotional expression, or poor impulse control, or emotional underreactivity. Again, borderline personal disorder, which of those is not one of those? Also, 29.18 talking about personality disorder, but a narcissistic, which I know quite a few of these people that are narcissistic. But someone who has these behaviors, there are a set of behaviors listed. You need to be able to say which one is not one of those behaviors. A narcissistic personality disorder behavior, do they expect to be recognized as superior? If you know a narcissist, you know that's true. They exaggerate achievements and talents, and usually they really exaggerate their talents and their achievements. Persistent grandiosity, a need for admiration, or a lack of empathy, or may exhibit frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. Which one of those is not a narcissistic personality behavior? 29.19 talks about some mood disorders. Talks about two. There's a need for two common mood disorders that you're going to face today. And so there's four there, which are four, there's 8 total, but there are 4 answers there. Which one is going to be 2 common ones? Borderline autistic, borderline and autistic, paranoia and mental retardation, institutional and regulatory, or depression and bipolar. And I will tell you that in my career, I've seen a lot more recently than others. I think it's become one of the popular disorders is everybody seems to be depressed and everybody seems to be bipolar. So just be conscious of that. Talking about a depressive phase, someone that's in a depressive phase in a bipolar disorder, which one of these is not going to be true of that? Are they going to have feelings of guilt and worthlessness? Are they going to have low energy? Are they going to feel fatigued? Or they're going to have the ability to enjoy usual activities? Which one of those is not true regarding a depressive phase in bipolar disorder? Also sticking with 29.19, the manic phase of bipolar disorder. I mean, good grief, if bipolar disorder is bad enough, apparently there's so many phases of it. But the manic phase, which of these symptoms could be included in the manic phase? A lack of interest, feelings of guilt or worthlessness, low energy, or the person's financial accounts may be in disarray so as to lead to adverse outcomes. So which one is a manic phase? Think about it. The person's financial accounts may be in disarray so as to lead to adverse outcomes. How I remember a manic disorder is that this person is just they're all over the place. Think about someone just tearing stuff up or being in disarray. So that kind of gives you a clue there. Be familiar with the definition of hallucinations. That's 29.20. That's another question. When we're talking about something that we've battled, and a lot of us probably have had family members battle this. I've had family and friends battle this. In fact, my aunt that passed away last week was apparently battling it the last 6-7 months of her life. It's Alzheimer's, and so talking about some interactions that a person who's suffering from Alzheimer's may have with us as law enforcement officers. Which of these is not going to probably be one of those interactions that we'll have with somebody? A car accident or erratic driving, indecent exposure. In other words, they're pulling their pants down, or they're taking a leak out in the middle of public, committing a homicide, or employee issues. Again, think about which one is not one of those possible interactions. Pretty easy to figure that one out, and you're going to see a lot of folks, dealing with car accidents and erratic driving because they're lost. They're not paying attention. They're just they're just not there. So again, indecent exposure, again, because they don't know where they're at. They're so disoriented because of the Alzheimer's. They may think that they're in a bathroom, even though they're right out there in the parking lot in the middle of hundred of people. Or they may become so disoriented and be suffering that they become violent and commit a homicide. So think about that. Employee issues, probably not one of those you're going to deal with. When we are talking about dealing with a person with mental health issues, or what is referred to as a mental health consumer, which is one of those kind of terms you should be familiar with. Which of these is a tactic that we can use for gaining trust and building rapport with that person? Maintain a calm tone of voice, minimize their point of view, or use the person's name, or maybe the first one and the third one. Maintaining a calm tone of voice is a good tactic in any communication. Using the person's name, we kind of talked about that I think in an earlier, the last test, that hearing that person's name, remember that's the sweetest sound, I think the question said. So think about that. Minimizing their point of view, that's probably not a good tactic. So think about that question. That's 29.47, by the way. 29.29, when you are questioning a person who you may have the thought that this person is suffering from an intellectual disability, what is something you should do? What is something you should do? Should you not tell them why you're there talking to them? Or should you tell them that you understand that they were retarded? I know you're retarded, Should you ask them long, detailed questions? Or should you speak slowly with this person? Again, when you're questioning a person who has an intellectual disability, what should you do? Speak slowly, but don't, obviously don't exaggerate it, speaking way too slowly because you think they're not going to understand you. Don't do that, but still speak slowly. 2929 again, another question. Of course, confirming that you're dealing with somebody that is suffering or may be intellectually disabled. You might ask them to do a few things. Or some of the things you could do to ask them to determine, hey, they are indeed intellectually disabled. Could you have them, a simple sentence or a simple statement, and have them read it or write it? Could you ask them to count to 100 by fives? Could you ask them, hey, how do you get to your house from here? Get at what directions, or how about all of those? Could those all be mechanisms to when you're dealing with somebody that you suspect to be intellectually disabled, to confirm that most people would know how to get back to their home. Most people can count to 100 by 5. Most people can read or write a simple statement. So again, that's something to think about. 29.27, be familiar with intellectual disability, what kind of the definition of that is. Of course, it includes failures to meet developmental and socio-cultural standards for intellectual and personal independence standards. So be familiar with the definition of intellectual disability. We're talking about suicide. 29.39 in the TCO guide there, talking about, again, suicide, protective factors against suicide. Which of these is not going to be one of those protective factors? Having a healthy support system, being employed, having access to local health services, or having a dysfunctional family. Obviously, a person's going to commit suicide. They're going to commit suicide. There's nothing anybody really can do to them. But what will help them, protect them, would be having a healthy support system, being employed, gainfully employed, having access to local health services. But a dysfunctional family is just going to, unfortunately, just going to throw fuel on the fire. So think about that one there. Be familiar with what makes up the suicide risk assessment. There's about four things, in there. Plans, methods, means, and intent. Or is it plan, motive, means, and desire? Or desire, means, method, and plan? Or intent, access, method, or plan? Think about it. Suicide risk assessment includes what? Plan, method, means, and intent. In 2018, this is 29.42. The suicide risk is 29.40. In 2018, the National Alliance on Mental Health and Illness, or NAMI, they did a study, and do y'all remember basically how many officers, and they may have seen in a percentage, but I'm going to give you like 1 in whatever or 2 in whatever. How many police officers have had thoughts of suicide at some point in their life? Is it 2 out of every 10 or 1 in 5? Is it 2 out of every 6 or 1 in 3? Is it 1 out of 10 or is it 1 out of 4 or 25%? Sadly, 1 out of 4 police officers have had at least thoughts at one point in their lifetime about suicide. Sadly, that's another problem we have as police officers, is that we have a not necessarily higher rate of suicide than the general than other professions, but we do tend to have a higher rate of suicide than the general population. There's 29.57 of the TCO guide. There is this is the question about taking a mentally ill person into custody. If you're taking a mentally ill person into custody, you got to file some notification of detention with the medical facility. Think about what is not required to be contained in that notification. Do you have to notify them or give them a detailed description of the specific behaviors, acts, attempts, or threats? Do you have to give a statement or provide a statement that the officer's beliefs or your beliefs are derived from specific recent behaviors, overt acts, attempts, or threats that were observed or reserved by or reliably reported to you as the officer? Do you have to provide a statement that the officer has reason to believe and does believe that the person evidences presents mental illness, and or do you or medical diagnosis believed to be a mental disorder or personality disorder is displayed by the person? Again, we're not doctors. Now I know some doctors that are cops, and I know some cops that are doctors. We have two doctors that I taught in the police academy. One's retired, a physician now, and I think he's actually retired. The other is the head of the ER at Trinity Mother Francis, Chris's Trinity Mother Francis, Mark Anderson. He is a certified peace officer, was kind of the SWAT team doctor for both the sheriff's office and the police department. It may still be, but we're not doctors, so we're not going to give medical diagnosis. We're going to provide statements that, what reasons we have, our beliefs are, and of course a detailed description there. 29.2 talks about, out of every 10 calls for police services, how many of those are going to involve a mental illness or an individual that's suffering from mental illness? Do you think it's 3 in 10, 7 in 10, 5 in 10, or every 1 in 10? Now, it may seem some days that it's all 10, but about 10% of our calls, 1 in 10, is going to deal with individuals that's suffering from some type of mental illness. 29.56, according to the TCO course guide, it talks about some examples of crime that people that have mental illness are commonly victims of. So the question is going to ask you which of these are not one of those crimes that they are kind of commonly victims of. They may have greater difficulty identifying behavior as abusive. In other words, they're a victim of abuse or assault. Their report may be less likely deemed invalid or reliable by authority figures. Children who suffer from mental illness may be more vulnerable to molestation or abuse, or they often don't know their own name. That's pretty simple. Most victims, most mentally ill persons are going to know their name, but they may not know what's happening to them is abusive, or unfortunately, we sometimes find he's imagining things, or children, unfortunately, who are mentally suffer from mental illness, a lot of times are more vulnerable to abuse and molestation. 29.57 goes back to talking about taking a mentally ill person into custody. One of the things we have to do is complete an emergency detention warrant. You need to be familiar with the four, basically, what are the requirements of those there? Do you have to put the reason to believe and do believe that the person is a person with mental illness, and because of that mental illness, there is a substantial risk of serious harm to the person or others, unless that person is immediately restrained. And of course, there's not sufficient time to obtain a warrant. Is it all the above, none of the above? Is it A, B, or C? And I think if you go back again, that you have completing an emergency detention warrant, it's got to include, that you have the reason to believe and do believe, in fact, to believe that the person is a person who is suffering from mental illness, and because of that mental illness, there's a substantial risk of serious injury or harm to them or to others, unless they are immediately restrained. And there's, of course, there's not sufficient time for you to get a warrant. So be familiar with that one. There's 29.57. 29.1, going back to that one, talks about some tactics and techniques taught in responding to individuals with mental illness. Which of these are, or are they all, or none of them, some of those tactics? Are these tactics taught to law enforcement officers due to increased responses to individuals in serious mental health crises? Different than those routinely taught to officers to manage conflict? Can help the officer safe, help keep you safe, keep the public safe, and greatly reduce civil liability, or all three tactics and techniques that are taught to respond there. So I think if you look at 29.1, you'll realize the correct answer involves multiple answers. That should tell you the answer there. 29.3 talks about Texas Senate Bill 1849. That states every law enforcement agency blank make a good faith effort to divert a person suffering from mental illness crises, mental health crisis or substance abuse to proper treatment. Senate Bill 1849 is one of those. There's a lot of you may, you shall, you may, you can, you should, you shall. This is one of those what? That's one of those shalls. Every law enforcement agency shall make a good faith effort to divert a person suffering from a mental illness crisis or substance abuse to proper treatment. Locking them up in jail is probably not going to help them, unless they're just completely violent, they've committed a major crime. If they're just having an episode, a crisis, then, we need to make a good faith effort to get them treatment, of course. You started again today, I think, with Officer Freeman, and you're probably going to continue that into the rest of this week and into next week, talking about critical incident training, or CIT. There's a question dealing with, 4 possible answers as how ways CIT, or critical incident training, can impact community relations. The question is going to ask you which of those 4 is not one of those ways that it has impacted community relations. Are officers' attitudes about the impact of critical incident training on improving overall safety, accessibility to services, officer skills and techniques, and the preparedness of officers to handle calls involving persons with mental illness are positively associated with officers' confidence in their abilities, or with officers' perceptions of overall department effectiveness? Or, is reduced complaints, financial liability, and lawsuits, as well as an increase of public trust and confidence in law enforcement among people suffering from mental illness, their families, and the community at large? Or is it CIT may have a transformative effect on officers' attitudes by increasing exposure to and familiarity with mental illness? Or is the answer, again, the question is which is not one of the CIT or one of the ways CIT impacts community relations? Or is it CIT has resulted in an increase in officers' injuries while involved in mental health related calls, decreased police shootings, and increase the need for SWAT team emergencies? I think you can figure that out pretty quick. Be familiar with the definition of crisis, CRISIS, crisis. That's 29.6. Be familiar with that definition there. 29.7 talks about potential causes. The next question talks about potential causes for mental health. A crisis include certain things. Which of these would not be one of those? Could a death of a pet, cause a mental health crisis? Getting locked out of their house or car, could that cause a mental crisis? Excuse me. Could a panic attack? No, I'm sorry. Could a legal difficulties cause that? What about passing a test? Do you think passing a test would be, something that's going to cause a mental health crisis? I would hope not. Failing a test, maybe, but passing a test, think of that. Or the question is asking which of the following is not a potential cause for mental health crisis? That was 29.7. The next question deals with 29.10. Talks about the sharp dividing line between normal and abnormal behavior and how it does not exist and is often based upon what? What's the dividing line, the sharp dividing line between normal and abnormal behavior? Is it financial norms for specific states? Is it educational norms for specific occupations? Is it acceptable medical society standards? Or is it the social norms for specific societies, cultures, and subcultures? Again, the sharp dividing line between normal and abnormal behavior does not exist and is often based on what? Then the next question is 29.12. Talks about how 2/3 of all people that suffer from a diagnosable mental illness, they do not what? They do not what? Unfortunately, they don't seek treatment. They don't seek treatment. Other questions, other possible answers deal with have medical insurance. A lot of the people do. A lot of people do. A lot of people, become, unfortunately, unproductive members of society or productive members of society. But 2/3, the question is talking about 2/3 of all people with a diagnosable mental illness, unfortunately, do not seek treatment. Think if these people could go out just there because who wants to go talk to a psychiatrist? Who wants to be, committed voluntarily even to a psychiatric hospital to help someone deal with it? No one does. And so seeking that help is unfortunately involves 2/3 of the people. And we kind of touched on this just briefly, is that the stigma, this is 29.13, the stigma with mental illness is due to a lot of factors. Which of these factors is not one of the stigma of mental illness? Mental illness continues to be widely misunderstood by the general public. The common stereotype that persons with mental illness are dangerous and unpredictable, although statistics do not substantiate that belief. Mental suggests an illegitimate medical condition that is it's just in your head. Or is it mental illness stigma discourages inaccurate perceptions? Again, mental illness stigmas discourage inaccurate perceptions. Again, we're looking at what stigma are there. Which one of those four is not one of those stigma? 29.14 talks about which of the following is, it's usually that is/are Which the following is true about the role and complications of psychotropic medications. Medication prescription and regime only affect behavior, not helping them with emotional roller coasters. And again, we're looking for which one is true. Medication is not an essential part of an effective treatment plan, as psychiatrists and psychologists facilitate all the needed support for a person experiencing a mental health crisis, or medication can help the person attain a degree of symptom relief that enables them to engage more fully in therapy and learning how to manage the condition through coping skills and self-care. Of course, there's also, is it all of the above are true or none of the above are true? I think, again, if you look at it, which of the following is true about the role and complications of psychotropic medications? It's there to help a person attain a degree of symptom relief. In other words, it works with them to be able to not fix them completely, but at least be able to go to get therapy and learn how they can manage it. They're not going to get rid of their problem, but they're going to be able to cope with it. The next question talks about some myths of mental illness. It's 29.16. So which of these is not a myth regarding mental illness? Is one of them is a myth? One of the myths: a person with a mental illness is also intellectually challenged. If you have a mental illness, you're crazy all the time. I can't do anything of a person, as a police officer, I can't do anything as a police officer or a family member or a friend. I can't do anything for a person with a mental health problem, or mental illness affects the average person. Which one is not a myth? Which of the following is not a myth? Mental illness affects the average person. The next question, 29.21, talks about some behaviors or indications dealing with in the ingestion of controlled substances that are classified as central nervous system depressants. So be familiar with some of those indications, such as incoordination, disorientation, sluggishness, thick or slurred speech, drunk behavior, stumbling and fumbling. Are those indications of that the person's ingested substances that are classified as critical nervous system or CNS depressants. That was 29.21. 29.22 talks about, I think, the symptoms and behavior associated with cognitive disorders. The question is asking you which of these are not going to be one of those, symptoms and behaviors. Is it ability to sustain attention to a task? Is it the ability to find the correct labels or words for an object or situation? Is it the ability to repeat words or digits or numbers? Or is it the ability to fully make plans and decisions? Which of these symptoms and behaviors is associated with cognitive disorders? Which of those is not? 29.24 talks about 6 out of 10 persons that we deal with, with a certain type of disorder will wander either on foot, via car, will just wander away. They'll just walk out the door and either walk. And I can't tell you how many times, that you will probably within, a year of getting out on the street, how many times you're going to get calls. But unfortunately, people that, a good majority, 60% or 6 out of 10 people that suffer from this disease will wander either on foot or via car. And if they're not found within 24 hours, unfortunately, more than half or up to half of them are going to, be in risk of serious bodily injury or serious injury or death. So in other words, 6 out of 10, if we don't find them in the first 24 hours, there's some substantial consequences to their safety. They're we may find them dead somewhere. I can't tell you how many times we found missing persons, wandered off in the woods, dead, I mean, one time we found a skeletal remains, and we combed the entire area off of a spur 364, just past Greenbrier Road. There's a railroad track, but there's also a swamp down there, and we looked up and down that road for days and days. A couple of squirrel hunters came across a skeleton, and unfortunately, what disease are we talking about? Alzheimer's. They they just don't know what's going on. Be familiar with the definition of autism spectrum disorder. Are they on the spectrum? Autism spectrum disorder. Be familiar with the definition. 29.26. Talking about degrees of intellectual disability. Which of these is not one of those degrees? Mild intellectual disability, profound intellectual disability, moderate intellectual disability, or insanity intellectual disability. Which of those four is not one of those? I think you can figure that one out. Insanity intellectual disability. What that person probably that's obviously not one of those degrees of intellectual disability. The next question is 29.30, talking about post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It's asking you which of the following is not one of the listed events that can result in PTSD: physical violence, sexual violence, combat. Well, actually, the answer is that all of them are. All of them are events that can result. So, a little tricky question there. Again, I apologize, I didn't write it, but it's a good, tricky little question, but it's pretty easy to figure that one out. It's asked which of the following is not one of the listed events that can result. Physical violence, sexual violence, and combat. All three of them are indeed events that can. If you've been in the military, and I think there's a couple of y'all that were in the military, that's the disservice that we do to our veterans, unfortunately, is dealing with PTSD. I was watching American Sniper for like the 15th time the other day, and was actually on last night too. That was one of the things that Chris Kyle worked with until he was able to deal with it. And then he found himself helping others. And of course, sadly, that's what caused him, got him killed, was a soldier, a Marine who was not dealing with it very well. If you've not seen that movie, see it. It's a really good. It's a really good movie. His book is even better, of course. His biography that the movie's based on. 29.32. Talking about somebody suffering from PTSD. When someone is suffering from PTSD, that's in a crisis situation, that they are experiencing a recurring primal activation of natural blank or blank response, and their primary goal is survival. Remember, it's that old what? Inhale and exhale, that old eat or sleep response, that predator or prey, or fight or flight response. It's a natural, every one of us has it. Some of us, it's more extreme than others, but someone that's suffering from PTSD, that's in a crisis situation, and they're experiencing this reoccurring primal activation of natural fight or flight response, and their primary goal at that point in time is survival. The next question, 29.33. Be familiar with the definition of moral injury. Moral injury. You need to be familiar with that definition there. There's unfortunately it's unfortunately an ailment that some people have. A lot of people do, and we probably at some point in time we all feel this way. But it's talking about a form of mental illness that can arise when someone survives something that others do not, and can lead that person to have a feeling that they should have been the one to die instead. What is that called? What is that called? It's a guilt, and they're the survivor. And so they have that guilt as a survivor. So be familiar with that. What is that called? That's 29.34 there. 29.35 in the T code guide there talks about certain symptoms and behaviors. Certain symptoms and behaviors of PTSD in a military veteran more than anybody else. But symptoms and behaviors of PTSD in a veteran, which you will deal with quite a few of those on the street every day. Which of these include that? Which of the following include some of those symptoms and behaviors? Intrusion symptoms, avoidance symptoms, negative thoughts or moods, all the above or none of the above? Again, symptoms and behaviors of PTSD in a veteran include intrusion symptoms, avoidance symptoms, negative thoughts or mood, all the above or none of the above. 29.35. 29.36 talks about veterans also share many commonalities with law enforcement, and that's why we have a lot of officers that are a lot of military that become police officers, especially more modern warfare, because especially in the Middle East, but pretty much in any battle now, it's more urban warfare, which is very much like what we do. But veterans veterans share a lot of commonalities with law enforcement, which includes several different things. But tell me which one of these is not one of those. Do we share a desire for public and personal safety? Do we share a personal ethos based on self-sacrifice? Do we share the ability to be trained to adhere to rules, structure, and command? Or do we share a desire to serve ourselves or themselves? Which one of those is not one of those commonalities? 29.36. Talking about interpersonal violence or IPV victims. Interpersonal violence victims can develop the same post-traumatic stress symptoms as those experienced by what category of persons? A robbery done by a stranger, a detention officer's duties, a law enforcement officer's duties, or someone who's been in military combat. Interpersonal violence victims can develop the same post-traumatic stress symptoms as those experienced by who? That's 29.36B, by the way. 29.37 talked about between 2005 and 2009, Texas lost 12,000 people to a certain thing, which was the top cause of injury for all ages in Texas. Was it motor vehicle collisions? Was it officer-involved shootings? Was it homicide or was it suicide? Between 2005 and 2009, Texas lost 12,000 people to what? Vehicle collisions, officer-involved shootings, homicide, or suicide. And ranking it as the top cause of injury, death for all ages in Texas. 29.38, the T-Code guide, course guide, lists some things as that are known and quantifiable suicide risk factors. Which one of these is not? If a person is suffering from substance intoxication, in other words, they're intoxicated, they've been doing drugs, a variety, whatever it may be, a legitimate prescription to clandestine narcotics. Is that a known and quantifiable suicide risk factor? The fact that they've had previous attempts of suicide, is that one of the factors? Or is a lack of support or connection to loved ones a factor? Or is it that it's heavily male at ages between 50 and 70? Again, which one of those is not one of those that's listed there? 29.38. 29.41, when we're talking about assisting a suicidal individual who is trying to seek personal support resources, what are some of the resources that we can consider referring to them to? You just need to go to jail, or you need to enroll in college, or you go to university. You don't need to get a job in employment, or Do we recommend or consider referring them to existing social supports or existing social support systems that are out there? Think about that one there. 29.41. 29.50. Crisis intervention skill that involves communicating with people experiencing mental health can be accomplished by using whatever this is, are intended to encourage communication. Are we going to use interrogatories? And are we going to, in other words, interrogate them? Are we going to ask them fast, quick, rapid questions? Are we going to ask them closed-ended questions? Or are we going to ask them or use reflecting statements? A crisis intervention skill involving communicating with people experiencing mental illness can be accomplished by using reflecting statements, which are intended to encourage communication, closed-ended questions, fast, quick, and rapid response, or interrogatories. 29.51, this is just an example here. Tell me what this is an example of. I understand you're frustrated and upset. I want to help you to resolve this situation, but here's what I need from you. This is an example of what? Is it an example of a question? Is it an example of a demand? Is it an example of a you statement? Or is it an example of an I statement? I understand you're frustrated and upset. I want to help you resolve this situation, but here's what I need you to do, or I need from you. What are those examples of? Should be pretty obvious. 29.52, be familiar with tactical transparency. Be familiar with the term and definition of tactical transparency. What is that referring to? Is it referring to explaining an action before initiating so the person with whom you are interacting knows what to expect? Again, think about it. Tactical transparency. I'm about to put handcuffs on your hands. I'm about to pat you down for weapons. You're explaining to them what you're doing. Again, tactically, but also you're being what? Open or transparent about what you're doing. Let them know what you're doing. That was 29.52, the T-code guy. 29.53, some options for responding to appropriately, some options for responding appropriately to verbal abuse. Which one of these is not an option? You just ignore demeaning language. I mean, in other words, you ignore, name calling, or whatever, even curse words and stuff. Do you focus on deflecting and redirecting the individual? Or do you respond with equal level of disrespect? Which one is not an appropriate response to verbal abuse? Ignoring demeaning language, focusing on deflecting and redirecting the individual, or responding with equal level of disrespect? Or are all three of them options? Or again, we're looking for which one is not. Which one is not? It's one of those accept questions. 29.55, in Texas, homeless persons who have mental illness remain homeless longer due to which of the following is not one of those reasons why persons in Texas that suffer from mental illness remain homeless? Is it that they're isolated from their family and friends? Is it because they're in poor physical health? Is it because they have a greater, unfortunately, frequency of criminal records? Or is it because they have steady employment? Again, in Texas, homeless persons with mental illness remain homeless longer due to all the following except. Which one is not one of those factors? 29.58. 29.58. We still got a few more questions to go. When we're talking about you as the officer and safety, when you're talking about officer safety and you're going to transport a person who's experiencing a mental health crisis, which of the following is an officer safety consideration when transporting? Is it locating a facility as far away from the jurisdiction as possible to ensure that they do not return to the jurisdiction? In other words, and this is something we were having a conversation the other day with another former sheriff, and I said, and we're talking about mental illness because that's what he specializes in now as a counselor. And I know we did that. We did this. You took them to the city limits if you're a police department. You took them to the county line if you're the sheriff's office, and you say, "There you go. You caught it. Leave the county." No, we don't. We can't do that. We can't do that. We're not trying to get rid of them and get them out of our jurisdiction. Do we? Again, we're talking about transporting a person who's experienced mental health crisis. Do we call them a cab? Hey, we're going to call a cab for you to get out of here. Do we say, hey, you know what? The train station's open, or the subway's safe and clean. Why don't you go down there? Of course not. But what we are going to do is do what? We're going to follow our departmental policies and procedures. Every agency may be different, but that's what you're going to follow, obviously. In 29.59 is a T. Cole guide here. Senate Bill 1849, Senator Whitmire, who's from Austin, back in 2017. We in education have some choice words about Senator Whitmire from a bill she forced down our throats a few years ago. But anyway, Senate Bill 1849 states the department shall require each local mental health authority to incorporate jail diversion strategies into the authority's disease management practices for managing adults with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder to do what? To increase the homeless population, to increase the federal funding received by the community, to increase the involvement of community resources, to increase the involvement of psychiatric students with studying these disorders, or to reduce the involvement of those clients with the criminal justice system. In other words, the bill talks about the department shall require each local mental health authority to incorporate jail diversion strategies into the authority's disease management practice for managing adults with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder in order to do what? 3 increased choices or reduce choice. Kind of figured which one probably sounds right there. Be familiar with what a mental health court is. Be familiar with the type of court a mental health court is. That's 29.60. 29.60. You've got a mental health consumer. TIN code for 1096 probably. But if you are able to contact a mental health consumer's provider, keep in mind that the provider is limited in the information that they can provide you due to patient confidentiality. It's that HIPAA. They can't talk to you much. However, you can provide information to the provider, and you can ask what? Can you ask them for a medical diagnosis? No. Can you ask if the patient has ever been admitted to a criminal, or has they ever admitted to a criminal offense? Can you ask how the patient pays for medical appointments? Or can you ask the provider how the provider recommends you proceed? What can you do, or what even should you do? Asking the provider. Again, it's more of a one-way street. They're not going to provide you much information because of confidentiality, but you can provide them information, and then you can ask them, how should I do what? How should I deal with this guy? How should I proceed? Be familiar with the goals actually probably of crisis intervention training is. That was implemented many years ago, probably well over a decade I can think of, probably even closer to 2 decades ago. Crisis intervention or critical intervention training. What are some of the reasons or the goals? Is it just to add hours to our records? It's just another class, an easy class to get. Is it providing officers with de-escalation skills to mitigate violence and increase officer safety and the public safety? Is it to prepare mental health organizations to manage incoming detainees or arrestees? Or is it to educate officers on how to identify behaviors that might indicate the presence of mental illness? Or is it that last one and maybe providing us some de-escalation skills in order to mitigate violence and increase our safety? So take a look at that. Goal or goals of crisis intervention training. That's 29.4, your T code guide. 29.11 talks about, or this question here is asking which of the following is or are, and I will tell you, and it's not because there's multiple answers like A, B, C, or D, or A, B, B, C, whatnot. It's just that there may be several components of the answer in that answer. But which of the following is or are true concerning national and statewide statistics related to mental health, physical health, and the prevalence of the issues in the population? Is it the majority of individuals with mental illness do not live productive lives? Is it that mental illness is less common than cancer, diabetes, heart disease, or AIDS? Is it mental illness ranges from severe to extreme? Or is it anyone can experience mental illness regardless of age, gender, race, educational level, or even social economic level? Think about that one there. That's 29.11. Talking about a person who's on medication, typically some type of psychotropic medication or something to help them with their mental illness. Consider why does a person stop taking the medication? Think about why they, a very common reason why. Is it because they're easily obtained? Well, if they're easily obtained, that's probably not a good reason to stop them. Can the medications not be used to get high? Well, I don't know if most of these psychotropic medications can get you pretty high, or at least you feel, something from it. Is it because medications aren't easily sold or to drug dealers for money? I want to get my prescription drugs and I'm going to sell them to some drug dealer to make some more money to do something else with. Or is one of the reasons, or a reason why people stop taking medication is because the side effects that they suffer are unpleasant. Some of the side effects of medications are pretty bad. And, a lot of us, take, some of those side effects, cause people not to do that. I don't want to take that anymore. It makes me feel bad. It makes me feel this or makes me feel that way. That was 29.15. 29.17, mental illness. Or mental illnesses impact a person's life by all the following. Which of the following does not or is not an impact on a person's life? Symptoms and symptoms and severity can change, occasionally being acute, sometimes then receding. Symptoms are often chronic or long-term, while others are acute or immediate. Conditions often occur simultaneously, as in substance abuse or other mental health conditions, or symptoms are often symptoms often are consistent throughout a person's life. Which of those mental illnesses impacts a person's life? Which of one of those is not one of those things? Symptoms often are consistent throughout a person's life. This stuff goes up and down, up and down, up and down. So kind of think about the right choice there. 29.31 talks about, again, post-traumatic stress disorder. What are some of the things that a person who is suffering from PTSD, what are some things that they may experience? A feeling or acting as if the event occurred in the past. Yeah, that's in the past. Decreased distress at reminders of the trauma. In other words, decreased distress. In other words, it's not increasing, impacting. It's basically they're kind of putting them behind them. Is it an increase in socialization? They're coming out of their isolation. Or is a person experiencing PTSD having recurrent unwanted dreams, images, or memories? My first impact, or my first, I guess, real world awareness of PTSD was when I was a patrol officer at Tyler PD snot-nosed 21, 22-year-old kid. We had an officer, and his name was Rick Wyatt. He had been an officer up in the Metroplex. I don't think he retired. Maybe he had retired, but he wanted to move back. He was in the military. He was in Vietnam. Rick Wyatt was a heck of a patrol officer. He's old school, but not dinosaur old school. He was, I would consider, a cop's cop. There was a guy, and for you guys from Tyler PD, and maybe some guys from the sheriff's office, but there was a guy back in the 80s named Bonnie Irwin. Bonnie was a guy. He was probably the largest drug dealer in the African American community here in Tyler and Smith County. He went to prison for murder. One of his associates that he thought was a snitch, which I think he actually was a snitch. In fact, his body was found up off of West Gentry, kind of to the west side of where the zoo's at. But Bonnie Irwin had a contract out. Rick was a great uniform officer that took a lot of dope off the street. Bonnie Irwin had put a contract out on Rick Wyatt. So every shift, somebody had to ride with him as a backup, because normally you're single man units, and back then we were more especially single man units. And I remember riding him for a couple of weeks, and learned real quick that there were certain sounds, certain things that would trigger Rick into kind of having a reaction. Nothing drastically bad, but it was something he was honest about and told me about. So post-traumatic stress disorder, is something that we have to deal with. In talking about a person who is experiencing PTSD, which of these is not a behavior of a person? Self-blame or survivor's guilt, persistent feelings of fear or horror, again, not a behavior of a person experiencing PTSD. Self-blame or survivor's guilt, persistent feelings of fear or horror, loss of interest or participation in events, gatherings, or social activities. In other words, they withdraw, or persistent and exaggerated positive beliefs and expectations. Okay. Should be pretty clear there. That was 29.31. 29.43, talking from the TCO guide, a way to change current mental health culture in law enforcement is to do what? Think about who you are and where you're at. That should help you figure that answer out. According to, a way to change current mental health culture in law enforcement. Think about who you are right now while you're taking this exam and where you're at, and realize what kind of training you're getting and how that training is hopefully going to improve on the emotional toll that you will suffer as a police officer, the work that the horrible things we experience and see, and then hopefully learning some coping techniques to do that. Talking about effective communication skills when we're trying to work with a possible mental health crisis. Four possibles here, and we're almost done. So we're almost done with this section. This is the third section. This is all the CIT, crisis intervention stuff. Talking about effective communication skills to aid in working with a possible mental health crisis. Which of these is not one of those? Don't try to diagnose the person or resolve the underlying issues. Focus on calming the situation and minimizing the level of stress. Attempt to stabilize the person through verbal and nonverbal, that should be probably nonverbal de-escalation skills. So look at that, nonverbal de-escalation skills, or rush into a resolution in the incident. Which one we're not going to do? Obviously, remember, time, slow things down, don't rush, and try to get through the call quick. Remember we talked about that in one of the other areas. I think it's de-escalation actually. So think about that. Two more questions in this group, and then this will be the wrap up of the third segment of the four reviews videos. 3-point assessment. A 3-point assessment. Which one is not one of those 3 points? This is 29.45. Behavior, level of comprehension, emotion, or intoxication. Which one of those is not listed as part of the initial 3-point assessment? And last but not least, be familiar with the definition of deinstitutionalization. Deinstitutionalization. Be familiar with what that means. It's the policy of relocating people experiencing severe mental illness out of residential mental health facilities and subsequent closure of many of those facilities. We did this during the 60s and 70s and even into the early 80s. And where do these people go that experience severe mental illness, who were in these facilities, and many of them, again, closed? You're dealing with them on 1 out of every how many calls? 1 out of every 10. Okay, guys, that is the sets of questions related to the review for critical incident training. This is going to be the end of part 3. Again, apologize for not being there. Apologize for being more boring than I am in real life. I've watched the video myself. I'm going, good God, I sound like an idiot. But I wanted to give y'all the opportunity to, it's all on y'all to watch these videos and utilize them. You're going to have a week. You're going to, all of them, this is the last one will be uploaded tonight. It's Tuesday. It's 6:30 or about 6:35 right now. I'll upload this. It'll take me a little while to get it into YouTube, but they'll be out there. So take an opportunity to study. Your test is again. Let's see. Your test is next Wednesday. I think at 1 o'clock. But Miss Grimes will let you know there. Since we're doing the review, I'm not sure what you got before. You do have something from 5 to 7 TBI, so not quite certain what you're going to be doing there. But your test will be next Wednesday, the 29th. Again, I'll be somewhere between, somewhere in the state of Wisconsin, Iowa and Wisconsin by the time, well, actually, I'll still be in Iowa when you're taking your test. So good luck to all y'all, and I'll see y'all back when I get back from vacation on the 5th.